Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. Big day today. Big something. The show is no bigger than it usually is. We're not going to extend past the 2-hour mark or anything like that to bring you live coverage. I suppose we could bring you live coverage. I don't know. Justice, abandon your program. Everybody else, give up your time slot, and we'll all watch TV together. And I don't think it would make very compelling radio. But it's indictment day for Donald Trump. That's happening. April 4th used to be known for various other things as well. But certainly this day goes down in history too, but not really. It's not really that big of a deal. It'll be very interesting to see. It's not indictment day. Indictment day is done. That was last week. It's arraignment day. And I guess Donald Trump has some plans for putting on a show, but I don't know how well the show is going to go. Lots of commentary about, we've moved past the commentary about whether or not it's a quote-unquote good thing for the country, and I would capitalize all of that. And now we're into the part of the show where they have Omarosa on TV to talk about reading Trump's body language to decide whether or not he's really actually frightened and apprehensive about the arraignment. I don't know. I guess that's kind of what happens in the 24/7 news thing. And they're looking for other things to talk about. But Trump apparently wants to make some production of what's going on today, and I guess he wants some footage that he wants to be able to exploit either for his campaign or just for his regular grifting. Laura Clausen actually covering that on the front page of Daily Kos today, and perhaps we can dive into some of that. Today is Tuesday, and ordinarily Joan McCarter Day, but feeling under the weather again. Described as a relapse, so I think I can say without violating any HIPAA regulations. All right, well, we wish our best to Joan in a speedy recovery, but this time a sustained and speedy recovery. But by all accounts, not COVID. I think we can say that, right? Last week we got that indication, and I just thought I would, and I think I got it. It was sent before the fact, but I realized it after the fact. But okay, all's well. It's just, it's a tough season and anything could be going on. Allergies, colds, the transition of the seasons. So anyway, we wish our best to Joan, and maybe we'll, something and blah, blah, blah. Maybe next week, maybe before then, I don't know. At any rate, we wish her well. She'll be busy enough as it is watching, I guess, the arraignment entertainment at some point, if they make a television show out of that. And then, of course, more importantly than that, also Laura pointing out from the front pages of Daily Kos that Trump's arraignment may not be the most important thing happening in U.S. politics on Tuesday. As Greg has pointed out repeatedly, trying to keep our eye on the ball. We have elections going on. There's a Chicago mayoral election going on. Is that right? And then, of course, we've been hearing for a couple of weeks now about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, which always strikes me as mildly ridiculous, but, I'm getting used to it. No more ridiculous than the other structures we've adopted in the various other states, but fingers crossed, and push somebody out the door to vote if they haven't already done it. If you find out that they haven't cast a ballot and you know who they are, then that is to say, if you know who they are, and they haven't voted. And if you know who they are, and you're a listener to the show, I have confidence that it's probably a good idea to push them out the door and make them vote. I didn't mean to say, those of you who voted, you know who you are. But that, too, if you are a registered Wisconsin voter and haven't cast your ballot for some reason in this race, perhaps you were waiting for Election Day, you're a traditionalist, today's the day, time to go. Get it done before the arraignment, if you have any interest in seeing what they have for you on television for that. The arraignment might be televised, even if the revolution will not be. There was some battle over whether or not to allow cameras in the court. I don't know where they came down on that. But as I mentioned, Laura was saying that Donald Trump is planning to put on a dramatic show. He wants to be able to exploit the imagery of him being persecuted by the evil, brutal dictator / wimpy, weaky guy that he's trying to get rid of, Joe Brandon Biden. You know the whole story. He's trying to cast this whole thing. He's a tyrant, but also the weakest guy in the world. And I guess for some reason he's decided in his all publicity is good publicity brain, lizard brain, that this will work out to his advantage. And I'm not really certain that it will, but this is what Laura has to say about it. Donald Trump is planning a big show for the day of his criminal court appearance. That's a nice phrasing of it rather than saying arraignment, which is a word that people might not know and might not understand the implication of, but criminal court appearance certainly spells it out. And great job selecting a photo that shows Donald Trump to be appropriately grizzled and bloated at the same time. And so good job. I don't know whether that was Laura chose the photo or whether someone else did. Anyway, Donald Trump will be arraigned on Tuesday in New York on charges reportedly including more than 30 counts of business fraud. I think we're up to like 30. I think I saw the number being bandied about. It was 34 counts here. 30 counts of business fraud and at least one felony included among them. True to form, Trump plans to make it something of a show. While he is unlikely to be handcuffed or perp walked and may not even have a mugshot taken out of fear that it would leak, and on the theory that everyone knows what he looks like anyway, that's probably a good idea. Or quite true, anyhow. And New York law bans cameras in courtrooms, so I guess that's where that comes down. Trump will make sure to milk the moment for the attention he so craves. It's too bad about the mugshot not being taken. I wasn't sure whether New York, whether at this particular, I guess, police precinct or wherever where they would be booking him, do they take those mugshots old school style, like standing in front of the measurement marks so that you can tell how tall the person is when they take the mugshot? Not all jurisdictions actually ever use that or still do use that or whatever. But I was curious to know whether, if that was going to be the case and were we going to get Donald Trump's like real official height once and for all. Would they make him take his shoes off if he was obviously in lifts or something like that? But now I guess we'll never know. So my part of the entertainment looks to be ruined. Reportedly, Trump was looking for the handcuffed perp walk, I guess knowing that he was going to be able to walk out of there at the end of the day on his own, released on his own recognizance. I guess he was looking for the photo op to, it's one thing to allow yourself to be handcuffed when you know you're getting out in a couple hours and that the cuffs are going to come off once you get in the building, etc. But at any rate, they said no. I read somewhere that the Secret Service actually had to, well, one, they had to be consulted in order to arrange this whole thing. Two, that they actually overruled the idea of handcuffs. They said that it was just out of the question. No way were they going to allow their protectee to be handcuffed. I'm not sure exactly, what the reasoning of that is. I mean, if their job is to stand around and take bullets for him if someone shoots at him, I don't see what having him handcuffed does. But, it restricts mobility, and it's probably not a great idea. I think they're probably right about that one. Anyway, but they also had to fight with him over the staging of it. Like, Trump wanted a big movie-like scene where, a bunch of motorcade pulls up and he gets out of the car and there's a mass of photographers taking his picture and shouting out questions from reporters, and they fight their way through the crowd and walk up the courtroom steps either in handcuffs or, under escort by the police so that it looked like, the full weight of the the mighty, mighty state. The big government was coming down, crashing down on him, but he was taking it bravely and, yada, yada. But as it turns out, most of that doesn't happen. And the Secret Service urged him, first of all, I guess it should probably be mentioned at some point that the judge, law enforcement at some level, plus, the judge presiding over the case, offered Trump the opportunity to avoid all of it and be arraigned via Zoom. Whether or not they needed him to be present in New York for that, I don't know. He may very well have been able to attend via Zoom from Mar-a-Lago in Florida, but Trump wanted the appearance and I guess instructed his attorneys to reject that offer. So that's one thing. And then secondly, the Secret Service also insisted, but I guess maybe lost this battle, that he ought to enter the building via some of the underground parking garage, or they have secure tunnel ways, etc., so that he wouldn't be visible to the public and therefore less of a target. And I guess he still had the latitude and the power with them to reject that plan, and he wants to be seen by the public and greet the crowd, though it's also not clear that there will be a crowd. He's called for protests everywhere, and they're just not materializing from what I've seen. And Manhattan would be a hard place to raise a pro-Trump crowd of any significant size and not be outnumbered by, say, the people in line at a nearby Starbucks that you could just call over. Everybody, free coffee if you go and counter protest over at the Trump arraignment, and that would probably take care of the crowd issues. All right, so where were we with Laura's story? Trump is expected to fly from Florida to New York on Monday afternoon, and he did do that. I saw Eric Trump tweeting out pictures of the television screens on board their private aircraft, tuned to, I guess, Fox News, which was covering the arrival in New York, and he tweeted out the picture of watching the plane arrive from on the plane, which is kind of surreal and weird, but also, you're arriving, accompanying your dad to his arraignment in New York City on charges stemming from his having, had an affair with paying a porn star to have sex with him while, one, you were a full-grown adult and off doing something else, and two, your second stepmother was, you know the story. Everybody knows that she was at home with their relatively young, almost newborn baby. He was off playing golf, poorly, I might add, in Lake Tahoe among the company of a stable of porn stars. And then, you know the rest of that. And Eric, completely oblivious that he was more interested in the shiny object of me on plane, now playing on TV. So maybe he wasn't fully in the moment. All right, anyway, Trump did fly to New York from Florida on Monday, and he stayed at Trump Tower Monday night, presumably. Went to court, or is due in court on Tuesday. That's today. I think the arraignment is supposed to be like 2 o'clock, but I read somewhere that he was planning to arrive at 11:30 or so. So right after the show, he's going to make sure that I don't have, live material for the show. It's ruining my day. I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. From there, he'll go directly back to Mar-a-Lago, where he'll offer a rant on Tuesday evening, feeding his continued campaign fundraising off the criminal charges. But while the public isn't going to see everything that happens at the arraignment, one very important thing will happen. Charges against Trump will be unsealed. It's important to remember that as of now, exactly what charges Trump faces are still not public. So every commentator you see talking about the strength or weakness of the charges is talking directly out of their own ass. How do you like that? Trump and his own lawyers actually don't know what the charges or evidence are. We're way too early to start deciding what motions we're going to file or not file. And we do need to see the indictment and get to work. Trump lawyer Joe Tacopina told ABC this week on Sunday. Look, this is the beginning. What a quote. Thanks, Joe. Trump's lawyers are already saying they'll vigorously contest the charges. I very much anticipate a motion to dismiss coming because there's no law that fits this, Tacopina says, but that's their job. the commentators who are out there making arguments about indictments they haven't seen are just being irresponsible. On Tuesday, we'll know more. But not before this show is over, anyway. Tuesday, we'll also tell the story of how much violent protest materializes. Claiming his indictment was imminent last month, Trump called for protests, but so far his supporters have not been showing up in significant numbers. Representative Marjorie Traitor Greene is going to New York on Tuesday for what she claims is a peaceful protest with the New York Young Republican Club, the group before which she said in December, quote, "If Steve Bannon and I organized January 6th, we would have won, not to mention it would have been armed." But it was armed, and they lost. The New York Police Department is preparing for protests, but according to a spokesperson for Mayor Eric Adams, there are no credible threats to the city at this time. District Attorney Alvin Bragg and his office, however, have faced death threats and vile, bigoted emails. Of course, and there are some examples of them reported. The New York Daily News, of course, thankfully supplying us with these things. Let's see. There's some George Soros references. In fact, hey, Hay, like hey, which is for horses. Hey, George Soros a-hole puppet. They presumably use the word here. The New York Daily News very genteelly offers us a asterisk hole. Hey, George Soros a-hole puppet, if you want President Trump, come and get me too, T.O. The New York Daily News reports one email read, "Remember, we are everywhere and we have guns." And, just by the way, I've noticed a spot on them and perhaps it could use a little cleaning. Not there. The spot. Take a look. Look closer. It's in the barrel. Okay. Anyway, another read, how do we have a N-word like you removed Fiam office? I guess Fiam is a typo for from, but I don't know whether it could be Laura's typo. I really don't know. Anyway, there's no indication with the little sick indicator. No indicator for the indication. Dang, couldn't get that right. Trump has aimed some of his most vicious attacks at Bragg, of course, in recent weeks, including a photo of himself holding a baseball bat next to a picture of Bragg. That post was subsequently removed. Trump has also attacked the judge who will be overseeing his case. Always a great move. Claiming the New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan, quote, all caps, hates me. Remember the XFL guy who had that on his jersey? He hate me? All right, well, probably not. Whatever we learn Tuesday, the Manhattan criminal charges against Trump remain just one of the serious legal threats he faces. He's additionally, of course, the subject of investigations by Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fannie Willis and Special Counsel Jack Smith. That is getting a little more serious, too, by the way, and we can offer some looks around at the reportage on that subject, too. Let's see, there was some other things that I thought might be worth mentioning that had run on the front page there at Daily Kos. Let's see if I can look around. Oh, well, for one thing, we forgot to mention that Finland is officially a part of NATO now. I guess all the resistance has fallen away and all the papers are signed and all the I's are dotted. There are no T's in Finland. They don't even use them. There's no T in the Finnish alphabet. All right. That's an April Fool's. We'll save that for next year. Just no T's in the word Finland, I guess. But I'm sure somewhere. There's a T in NATO, and we'll make sure that all of those are appropriately dotted and crossed as necessary. Capital I's, of course, wouldn't need to be dotted. So, anyway. But there's none of those in Finland either. Okay. Just getting you up to date on spelling and who's in what alliance at this point. Let's see. Other things, let's see. More criticism for Leslie Stahl in her terrible interview with Marjorie Traitor Greene. But other than that, not too much from the morning's headlines and promos from over at the Daily Kos website. Of course, as I mentioned, Joan unable to make it today, but I'll scan through her most recent diaries. I'll tell you probably what we would have talked about had she felt better today and was able to call in and attend. Okay, let's see. I guess the next story I kind of have to go to is sort of out of left field, but I see also it's been diaried over at Daily Kos. But a local story that we had handed to us by production staff last night during our production meeting, our evening production meeting. Yeah. And I missed this entire story, and apparently it's, been out there, and it wasn't until, I guess, it reached its dramatic and crazy conclusion that the headline was wild enough to want to click on this one. But how about this? Mild-mannered reporter turned Republican governor of Maryland, now replaced the former Republican governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, he of the middle of the road, yada, yada, blah, 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 by comparison anyway, to the Trump crazies. Former governor's former chief of staff is who we have in mind here. And given that that's the case, wouldn't you not expect the headline to be former top aide to then Maryland Governor Hogan dies during arrest in Tennessee? Now that headline has changed because last night the story was that he was and this is still part of the story, but I guess maybe details are developing, and it was unclear exactly how it had happened. But I had missed the whole of the story anyway, but apparently wanted on some criminal charges, which is by itself is pretty incredible. Chief of staff to the former governor, but that he was a fugitive from these charges and that he died. I guess that he was shot during an FBI arrest on these charges. So he's gone fugitive. They're after him, and then there's gunfire, and he's dead. And it's what happened here? But then even last night it was kind of unclear. Well, it's not clear whether they got in a shootout and the FBI shot him, or whether he was holed up in an apartment somewhere and they surrounded him and he shot himself. And I guess now it's starting to sound like that might be the case. But the whole story seemed wild from start to finish. Now, of course, we'll read the details and maybe make it less wild. Anyway, this comes from WTOP, the local news radio station. But actually, I guess the write-up, it's on the WTOP site, but the write-up is AP work from Abigail Constantino. And here's what she's got to say. A former Maryland political aide wanted on corruption charges died Monday in Tennessee after he was wounded during a confrontation with law enforcement. So this is kind of dramatic. After all, it was not immediately clear whether McGrath's injury was self-inflicted or as a result of an exchange of gunfire. Roy McGrath was the former chief of staff to then Governor Larry Hogan. He had been on the run since March. Did we even realize this? That's the real March Madness. After failing to appear at trial on charges that included fraud, theft, and falsifying records. I mean, I just would never have guessed that that's something you don't appear at and then go on the lam as the chief of staff to the former governor. In an email to WTOP News, McGrath's lawyer, Joseph Murtha, no relation to the, I guess maybe it is a relation to the former Congressman John Murtha. They relocated to the Washington, D.C. area from Pennsylvania? Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, McGrath's lawyer, Joseph Murtha, said that the FBI has confirmed his client's death. That was probably a pretty simple thing to do. William Brennan, an attorney for McGrath's wife, Laura Bruner, also confirmed the death and said she was absolutely distraught, the Associated Press reported. It is a tragic ending to the past 3 weeks of uncertainty, Murtha said. I think it's important to stress that Roy never wavered about his innocence. Okay. The spokesperson with the FBI said that the arrest happened in Knoxville, Tennessee, on the 10,700 block of Kingston Pike at Lovell Road, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And if you're in the area, maybe you have some sense of what kind of place that is to get involved in a shootout with the FBI. Would it just be totally inappropriate, like at a country club? Or is it a made-for-TV movie scene? Well, anyway, the FBI, unlike me, I guess, takes all shooting incidents involving our agents or task force members seriously. The Bureau said in a statement they should take everything seriously, I think, adding that the shooting is under investigation by its own inspection division. That makes sense. I missed the chance to read that the FBI said that during McGrath's arrest, he sustained an injury and was taken to the hospital. It's just not clear how. In a statement, Hogan said he and his wife, Yumi, are deeply saddened by this tragic situation. We are praying for Mr. McGrath's family and loved ones, another gunshot and in a prayer following. Earlier this month, a $20,000 reward from the FBI and U.S. Marshals Service, had been offered for information in the search for McGrath. McGrath failed to appear on March 13th, prompting a federal judge to issue a warrant for his arrest. A federal search for McGrath, 53, ensued, including in Naples, Florida. Wow. It's a nice place, and I guess if you're going to go on the lam, you might as well do it in Florida, and Naples is a fine place to do it, but not usually where you try to disappear to, per se. Anyway, he had been living there, and I guess therefore it makes some sense that you might think he was hiding there, and from where he was supposed to travel to Maryland for the trial. They were expecting him to come in from Naples. FBI agents also raided his Florida home as the search continued, the Associated Press reported. That made him feel like an ex-president, I guess. McGrath faced more than 30 state and federal criminal charges for wire fraud, misconduct in office, and improper use of state funds, according to indictments filed in 2021. So, not entirely without parallel to the former guy himself.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on at Roots Radio. Well, we've more or less reached the end of the story here, but just to give the last details that the AP offers us about this kind of weird, unexpected story. Before McGrath became Hogan's chief of staff, he was the head of the Maryland Environmental Service. And I must say, I don't know if there's a type that you would expect when you see a photo of the type of person who, if they faced criminal charges, would become a fugitive instead and then, die by gunshot wound, presumably, upon his arrest weeks later after a, regional, if not national, manhunt for the fugitive. But this isn't the guy. I mean, if you were, I guess, casting for a live-action Simpsons movie and you needed somebody to play the weirdo lawyer that Mr. Burns constantly hires to represent him, you might use this guy instead. So, I mean, I don't know what's going on, but I imagine if you're if you maintain your innocence in the middle of all this, I don't know. I guess at some point, if you're pretty sure you're being railroaded, I don't know that you can resist the temptation to say, well, I'm I'm just not going to give in and submit myself to the judicial system here. It's just not right. It's not fair. I'm being framed. I don't know. Of course, if you're just a psychopath criminal, I guess you do the same thing. So it's a little difficult to tell. Anyway, as I said, McGrath faced more than 30 state and federal criminal charges of wire fraud, misconduct in office, and improper use of state funds. Before he was chief of staff, he was the head of the Environmental Service. He was accused of fraudulently securing a $233,648 severance payment, equal to 1 year of salary as the head of Maryland's Environmental Service. Okay. I mean, he was the head of Maryland's Environmental Service. I guess maybe the word is that he wasn't supposed to be entitled to a 1 year severance, but he somehow wrangled it for himself, and that was part of the fraud. He falsely told the agency's board that the governor had approved the payment. And I mean, I guess they checked, and the governor said, "What? No." And then fugitive. I mean, weird. The Associated Press, oh yeah, okay. So that's according to the Associated Press. Hogan said that he did not sign off on the severance payment. Maryland Matters reported, and that's an outside source here, also rounded up for us by WTOP, though, if you wanted to click through to that. He was also accused of fraud and embezzlement connected to roughly $170,000 in expenses. McGrath pleaded not guilty. He resigned just 11 weeks into the job as Hogan's chief of staff in 2020 after the payments became public. And I guess, I mean, I don't know that I would have noticed that the chief of staff to the governor of Maryland resigned, even under a cloud of fraud, in 2020. And just 11 weeks into the job, I don't know whether he started right at the beginning of 2020. Was Hogan inaugurated? No, I guess he wasn't. So he would have been mid-term, right? And then I don't think I would have noticed a new chief of staff coming on board. Maybe he started in January. 11 weeks into 2020, if the clock started for the guy, I don't know when he resigned. But it could have been around COVID time or right in the middle of COVID. There was a lot going on in 2020 that we probably wouldn't have noticed this. But wow, okay, so he just told the Maryland Environmental Service Board, "Oh yeah, I'm going to become chief of staff, but the governor said you should pay me a full year's severance." Like, what do you even need severance for? You just got a new job. So, I don't know. I guess they were right to question it, and it turned out not to be the case. And how would you like that? You're the governor. You hire a new chief of staff, and immediately the guy is stealing $500,000. And you're like, what the hell with this guy? Get out of here. We need your resignation. He resigns. He's charged. And then a couple of years later, he skips his court date and goes on the lam and dies in a manhunt in Knoxville, Tennessee. Well, probably nobody thought that was going to happen. I didn't either, and I didn't think we were going to talk about it even until we found out about this last night. So, that's pretty crazy. Anyway, back to the former guy who is terrible and remains so. The Washington Post reported yesterday, and this was the subject of much talk yesterday, but not on the show because we didn't get to it, that the Justice Department, according to the headline here, is said to have more evidence of possible Trump obstruction at Pervalago. That's good. I love when they develop more evidence of obstruction. Ex-staffers' emails and texts are guiding investigators who increasingly suspect Trump went through his boxes after the subpoenas were issued. So, that would be pretty damning, and I guess what they're looking for is the evidence that they can use in convincing a jury that that's what he did. Which would show, of course, more obstruction and intentionality and essentially an acknowledgement of the validity of the subpoenas and yet lack of compliance with them. And if he were perhaps removing items or relocating items that he thought it likely that federal law enforcement would locate and take from his possession and he wanted to hold on to nonetheless, well, This would not go well for him, legally speaking. Devlin Barrett, Josh Dawsey, and Perry Stein wrote this piece. Justice Department and FBI investigators have amassed fresh evidence pointing to possible obstruction by former President Donald Trump in the investigation into, the documents at Mar-a-Lago. The additional evidence comes as investigators have used emails and text messages from a former Trump aide to help understand key moments last year, said the people. Who are these people who are so familiar with the matter? Who, like others interviewed for this article, spoke on condition of anonymity because da-da-da-da-da. The new details highlight the degree to which Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the potential mishandling, really, of hundreds of classified national security papers at Trump's Florida home and private sex dungeon have come to focus on the obstruction elements of the case. Whether the president, or former president rather, took or directed actions to impede government efforts to collect all these sensitive records. And I'm reminded at this point, and I think one of the stories at Daily Kos in the last couple of days, reminding everybody of what Trump said during one of his stupid interviews with Sean Hannity lately, in which Hannity is actually sort of trying desperately to get him to stop confessing to this crime. But Trump spends a minute or two insisting, no, let me speak, and saying, you have to understand, I have the right to have these documents. I was president. We're talking about the Presidential Records Act, and I'm the president. I have the right. I can take things if I want to. I can. I have that right. And you do not have that right, and it's unwise for you to assert that you do. I mean, one, you're wrong about that, but even if you were proven eventually to be right about that and you had the right to take some documents, but not every document you ever wanted in your life, not ones that you're under judicial order to return directly, etc., etc., it's bad for your legal situation. Anyway, let's see, where were we here? Oh, yes, right. The emphasis on obstruction marks a key distinction between the Mar-a-Lago investigation and a separate Justice Department probe into how a much smaller number of classified documents ended up in an insecure office of President Biden's, as well as his Delaware home. They felt compelled to mention, of course, both sides. That case does exist. So, the Trump investigation is much further along than the Biden probe, but that's not really the main difference. It is, of course, being overseen by a different special counsel, Robert K. Hur, who's we like to call Ben, I guess. Biden's lawyers say they have quickly handed over all classified documents found in Biden's possession. The Trump investigation team has spent much of its time focusing on events that happened after Trump's advisors received a subpoena in May demanding the return of all documents with classified markings, though those people who are familiar with the matter said. Smith is trying to determine if Trump or others mishandled national security documents and if there is enough evidence to ask a grand jury to charge him with obstructing the investigation. The Mar-a-Lago investigation is one of four separate criminal probes involving Trump, who is, of course, campaigning for another term in the White House. Trump has been indicted by the New York grand jury. You know about that. And he is set to make his first court appearance there today. He's also being investigated by the Justice Department and state prosecutor in Georgia over efforts to block Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 election. An FBI spokesman referred questions to a spokesman for the special counsel who declined to comment. Trump spokesman Stephen Chung, I don't think I know this guy, said in a written statement, so really he's a Trump rightsman rather than a spokesman, the witch hunts against President Trump have no basis in facts or law. And in fact, they have excellent basis in both, but whatever. The deranged special counsel and the DOJ have now resorted to prosecutorial misconduct by illegally leaking that information to corrupt the legal process and weaponize the justice system in order to manipulate public opinion and conduct election interference because they are clearly losing all across the board. Sure. The statement went on to point to the Biden classified documents probe, as well as the investigation of Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server when she was Secretary of State in 1842, suggesting that conduct there was worse than anything that happened at Pervolago. I don't think honestly, worse things happen online at the buffet on a Thursday night at Pervolago than happened in those cases. But all right. President Trump is the only leader fighting for the Constitution and to protect the American people from being abused by those who want to destroy our system of government, with the exception of me, who wants to destroy our system of government. In the classified documents case, federal investigators have gathered new and significant evidence that after the subpoena was delivered, Trump looked through the contents of some of the boxes of documents in his home, apparently out of a desire to keep certain things in his possession, the people familiar with the investigation said. So, just makes things worse for himself. You get a subpoena, you need to return all these documents. You can't now claim, what documents? I had no idea. My staff. He looked through them and said, what do I want to hide from the feds? What do I want to remove from these boxes so that I can return the boxes and say I've complied with your subpoena and still keep certain materials? Investigators now suspect, based on witness statements, security camera footage, and other documentary evidence, so they can prove it 3 different ways, that boxes including classified material were moved from a Pervolago storage area after the subpoena was served, and that Trump personally examined at least some of the boxes, these people said. While Trump's team returned some documents with classified markings in a response to the subpoena, a later FBI search found more than 100 additional classified items that had not been turned over. Court papers filed seeking judicial authorization for the FBI to conduct the search of Trump's home show agents believed that, quote, evidence of obstruction will be found at the premises. The application for court approval for that search said agents were pursuing evidence of violations of statutes including 18 U.S. Code 1519, which makes it a crime to alter, destroy, mutilate, or conceal a document or tangible object with the intent to impede, obstruct, or influence the investigation or proper administration of any matter within the jurisdiction of any department or agency. So, they're pretty intent on charging you with a crime if you do something like that. A key element in most obstruction cases is intent, because to bring such a charge, prosecutors have to be able to show that whatever actions were taken were performed to try to hinder or block an investigation. In the Trump case, prosecutors and federal agents are trying to gather any evidence pointing to the motivation for Trump's actions. The Washington Post reported in October that Trump's valet, Walt Nauta, I don't know if it says Nauta or, for all I know, through Warbler Mangrove, had told investigators that he moved boxes at Pervolago at the former president's instruction after the subpoena was issued. Smith's team has video surveillance footage corroborating that account, the Post reported, and considers the evidence significant. In addition, the people familiar with the investigation said authorities have another category of evidence that they consider particularly helpful as they reconstruct events from last spring, emails and texts from Molly Michael, an assistant to the former president who followed him from the White House to Florida. This was known to him. He brought her with him. It wasn't just a stowaway in the wheel wells of the plane or anything. Before she eventually left that job last year, Michael's written communications have provided investigators with a detailed understanding of the day-to-day activity at Pervolago. It was very pervy. At critical moments, these people said. Who are these people? Michael's lawyer did not respond to requests for comment. Investigators have also amassed evidence indicating that Trump told others to mislead government officials in early 2022, and any chance they got, I'm sure, before the subpoena, when the National Archives and Records Administration was working with the Justice Department to try to recover a wide range of papers, many of them not classified, from Trump's time as president, the people familiar with the investigation said. So, also not good. While such alleged conduct may not constitute a crime, he wasn't yet under a subpoena and we're not sure of the nature of the documents, it could serve as evidence of the former president's intent. Yes, very true. These people said prosecutors have collected evidence that Trump ignored requests from multiple advisors to return the documents to the archives over a period of a year, that he asked advisors and lawyers to release false statements claiming he had returned all documents, and that he grew angry after being subpoenaed for the documents. Investigators also have evidence that Trump sought advice from other lawyers and advisors on how he could keep documents after being told by some on his team that he could not. People familiar with the investigation said they have collected evidence that multiple advisors warned Trump that trying to keep the documents could be legally perilous. And now it is. As investigators piece together what happened in May and June of last year, they have been asking witnesses if Trump showed classified documents, including maps, to political donors. People familiar with those conversations said that would also be very, very bad. Such alleged conduct could demonstrate Trump's habits when it came to classified documents and what may have motivated him to want to keep the papers. The Post has previously reported that Trump told aides he did not want to return documents and other items from his presidency, which are by law supposed to remain in government custody, because he believed they belonged to him. Here we have the Hannity interview problem, but only one of the problems with that particular interview. There are several that arise from it, but one of them is, he's maybe suffering from some early form of dementia and just never, or just never understood anything, or just doesn't believe that there is such a thing as a law that applies to him. So, but he's convinced that he has to, I can't tell whether it's something that he, gave some thought to but misunderstands, or whether it's just Donald Trump is just that simple a person. He grew up believing the president has unlimited powers and he can do whatever he wants and there's no limitations and there's no law. And, in his time, there have been presidents that have probably made him think that that was the case. But it's not supposed to be. And I don't know whether it's just him being a simpleton or whether he has some, I don't know whether he's been told this by somebody or it's just something he made up and maybe this will take a long time to sort out in court. It's difficult to tell with him, but at any rate, it doesn't really matter what he believes about what right he thinks he has. It's pretty much in black and white what rights he does and doesn't have with respect to these papers. And I don't know. So very bad idea for him to have blurted out his theory that, no, I've read the law and the law says the exact opposite of what it actually says. It's in print and everybody can look at it and tell that he's wrong. But all right. Such alleged conduct could demonstrate Trump's habits, as we said, when it comes to classified documents. So as far as, I guess they figure it helps illustrate motive. It might be just as dumb as we all thought. He wanted to keep these classified documents so that he could show them to donors so that they would keep donating money that he could keep grifting and living off of. And that's all it really is. I found a curiosity from my days, anomalous days in government, when people actually alleged that I was president of the United States and gave me temporary control and custody of these documents. I then stole them so that I could show them off for $50 at a time or whatever is the donations that he's looking for. It's pretty incredible, but all right. So he claims to genuinely believe that he has the right to do whatever he wants with these documents. And, I don't know. I mean, the kids should really put him away at this point. Investigators have also asked witnesses if Trump showed a particular interest in material relating to General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. People familiar with those interviews said Milley was appointed by Trump, but drew scorn and criticism from Trump and his supporters after a series of revelations in books about Milley's efforts to rein in Trump toward the end of his term. In 2021, Trump repeatedly complained publicly about Milley, calling him an, quote, idiot. But it didn't matter because, thankfully, Trump was no longer president then. But I'm sure Milley was not very happy about it. The people did not say whether investigators specified what material related to Milley they were focused on. The Post could not determine what has led prosecutors to press some witnesses on those specific points, or how relevant they may be to the overall picture that Smith's team is trying to build of Trump's actions and intent. It should be very exciting when we finally find out. But people familiar with the matter stressed that a major thrust of the investigation has been the question of obstruction and whether Trump sought to deliberately prevent officials from gathering all of the classified material at Mar-a-Lago, and I think the answer is clearly going to become yes. He absolutely did. Whether or not they can figure out the exact reason, I don't know, but they may not need to demonstrate it beyond the fact that there are plausible reasons and lots of evidence to believe that those are the reasons, despite any denials you might hear from Trump. That would be enough. Remember that at bottom, this is a fact-finding mission for a jury, should it ever go to trial. And, at its most elemental, it doesn't necessarily matter whether Trump had that motivation or didn't. What matters is whether the jury believes that he did. He may, just at bottom, this is the way the criminal justice system works in this country. The truth could be that Trump did not have the motivation that they ascribe to him, but 12 people don't believe him when he says that's the case, and they instead believe he did have this motivation. Then at the end, we all say, well, it was all a big mystery, but now it's decided officially for all purposes, for all intents and purposes in this country, Donald Trump did have that motivation. Not because Donald Trump said he had that motivation, nor did he actually have that motivation, if you believe him. But 12 people whose job it is to weigh the evidence say, we've reached the conclusion that he's probably lying when he says he didn't have that motivation and that he in fact did. And from that point onward, he did have that motivation. That's just a fact now. We treat it as fact, and that'll be the end of it. So, don't forget that that's a pretty astonishing power to decide what the truth actually is. And you could be completely wrong. Anyway, the case stretches back to efforts by archives officials, of course, to retrieve documents and other items from the former president in 2021 after they came to believe that some presidential records from the Trump administration, such as letters from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, were unaccounted for and perhaps in Trump's possession. But if he hadn't been such a loudmouth about that letter, probably they never would have noticed. Anyway, after months of back and forth, as you recall from hearing all about this story for months, Trump agreed in January to turn over 15 boxes of material. When archivists examined the material, they found 184 documents marked classified, including 25 marked top secret, which were scattered throughout the boxes in no particular order, according to court filings. The discovery suggested to authorities that Trump had not turned over all classified documents in his possession when he left the White House. In May, a grand jury subpoena demanded the return of classified documents with a wide variety of markings, including a category used for secrets about nuclear weapons. So we're coming up on a year since they actually had to use the grand jury subpoena, if you're just wondering how slowly these wheels turn. In response to the subpoena, Trump's advisors met with government agents and prosecutors at Mar-a-Lago in early June, handing over a sealed envelope containing another 38 classified documents, including 17 marked top secret, according to court papers. According to government filings, Trump's representatives claimed at the meeting that a diligent search had been conducted for all classified documents at the Sex Dungeon Club. Agents continued to gather evidence that suggested Trump was not fully complying with either government requests or subpoena demands, and that his team might have misled authorities and possibly held on to some sensitive files. And now, of course, they're developing evidence that they may have misled authorities at his personal direction. On August 8th, FBI agents conducted a surprise. What? Is it really a surprise? I don't think so. But okay, that's what it says here. A surprise court-ordered search of Mar/Perv Alago. It wasn't a surprise, though. I don't really know why they call it that. And found 103 documents marked classified, including 18 marked top secret, according to court papers. The investigation has recovered documents that describe highly sensitive U.S. intelligence efforts aimed at China, one document describing Iran's missile program, and material covering other sensitive topics, including nuclear secrets. Smith's team has been presenting witnesses and evidence for months to a grand jury in Washington, focused on the Perv-Alago probe, even as a separate and different grand jury at the same federal courthouse hears evidence related to efforts to block the results of the 2020 election. And the state-level prosecutors in New York and Georgia press forward with their cases. The Perv-Alago prosecutors recently won a court fight that allowed them to question Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran, Evan Corcoran, in case you were wondering where the M went, before the grand jury about what he knew about the documents. Grand jury proceedings are, of course, secret, and Smith has given no public indication of the pace of his investigation or when he expects it to be finished. But I don't know. It would be nice if it was around the same time as his arraignment here in New York. Let's see. Message from Scott here. I think he's referencing the Sean Hannity interview that we had mentioned earlier. But the actual quote, maybe he wanted to hear Trump's voice saying it. But it's almost music time. So let's see. Getting ready to get rid of the alarm there. In a Fox News interview that aired on March 27th, Trump told host Sean Hannity, "This is the Presidential Records Act. I have the right to take stuff. Do you know that they ended up paying Richard Nixon, I think, $18 million for what he had?" I don't know what he's talking about here. They did the Presidential Records Act, whatever that means. I have the right to take stuff. I have the right to look at stuff, but they have the right to talk, and we have the right to talk. And I don't even really know what that's supposed to mean, but I'm 10 seconds late with the music as it is. I have the right to talk. They have the right to talk. All right, this would all have been worked out. All of a sudden, they raided Mar-a-Lago. Viciously raided Mar-a-Lago. Oh, well, anyway, I don't know what kind of understanding he has of the situation here. I don't remember the $18 million thing. I wonder what the root of that is. We'll take a look. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Awkward spot coming back into the music, but as you know, we were a little late with it. What did Donald Trump mean about the $18 million? Well, you know, there's a germ of truth to it. There has to be. There usually is. And it's usually misunderstood by Trump, and this might be the case as well. But just a quick Google tells us, although who knows now these days, it might have been made up out of thin air, and an AI chatbot might have generated this hit, but it might also be a historical fact. But this is a latter-day development in the Nixon case coming from the year 2000 or so. And here, a LA Times archived article here, U.S. to pay $18 million for Nixon tapes and papers. Robert L. Jackson reporting for the LA Times. At the time, the federal government has agreed to pay $18 million to the estate of Richard Nixon to settle claims that the Watergate tapes and other presidential materials were improperly seized by the government in 1974 without compensation. It seems like a tenuous claim, given that it was, I guess the claim at the time was that the tapes were government property, and now there's in the year 2000, so 23 years ago, a suit by the estate saying that it was in fact personal property and an improper taking by the government, and then he wins at some point. But he's dead. So, even trade. And I'll tell you what, I guess Trump is already thinking, I'll cash in, I'm going to get the $18 million. Although he's probably presenting the idea both that, well, they only had to give him the $18 million because obviously he did have the right to keep those tapes, and they took them from him, and that's proof that I have the right to keep these tapes. Of course, it might be proof of nothing more, or could be a proof of nothing of the sort, or could be proof that when he's dead, that his estate might have some claim, which, like I said, could work out as a wash in my book, but I don't know. But yeah, there's not going to be much explanation of the legal fine points probably in this very short LA Times article, but maybe it's something we ought to look into. Maybe it doesn't have to all happen right here, right now, but there is a germ of truth to it here. An out-of-court agreement climaxing a 5-month civil trial that ended last year. This, again, was written in 2000, so ending last year, 1999. They sued him like it was 1999, or his estate sued the government. And the out-of-court agreement would result in $6 million in improvements and expansion for the Richard Nixon Library and Birthplace in Yorba Linda, California, and paves the way for copies of his White House tape recordings and papers eventually to be made available at the Orange County facility, officials said. And I don't know if that's a great settlement for the legacy of Richard Nixon necessarily, but $6 million worth of improvements, I'm sure they were happy about that. But I guess the end result is the extraordinarily incriminating tapes will be made available to visitors to listen to when they come to the Nixon birthplace, and then you can come away saying he really was an incredible crook. And but I guess it doesn't matter very much to Richard Nixon because he's dead. Justice Department lawyers argued in federal court in 1999 that placing any value on Nixon's materials was speculative, and that in no case should payment exceed $2.2 million. I'm not certain why there should be any payment at all. Lawyers for Nixon's heirs sought compensation of $213 million for 3,700 hours of tapes and more than 4 million pages of historic White House documents. I'm not certain why they felt entitled to compensation for any of it, really. And really, honestly, quibbling, that's quite an amount, difference to quibble over. They wanted $213 million. The Justice Department said, well, in no case should it be more than $2.2 million. But in some case it was, because apparently there was an $18 million agreement instead. So that's kind of, but even $1, I don't understand. Well, let's see if there's any explanation here. David W. Ogden, the Justice Department official in charge of the case, called it, quote, a fair resolution that brings to a close 20 years of litigation surrounding Nixon's materials. John H. Taylor, executive director of the Nixon Foundation, said in an interview Monday that the agreement was, quote, a fair, equitable, and good compromise negotiated in virgin legal territory. Well, anyway, that's probably what caught Trump's eye. Shortly after Nixon's resignation in 1974, everyone remembers that? Yes. Congress decreed that the General Services Administration, the GSA at the heart of everything again, the parent agency of the National Archives, should seize all his White House recordings and papers to guarantee that Nixon would not destroy them. All right. Until that time, presidents traditionally were free to take all their papers and other historic materials with them into retirement. But Congress made an exception in Nixon's case because he was the first president to resign in a criminal scandal. His successor, Gerald R. Ford, granted him a full pardon from any possible future prosecution. The Watergate tapes, which Nixon surrendered only when the Supreme Court ruled against him, which is why I think, there should be no compensation for it, really, documented conspiracy and obstruction of justice by Nixon and his top aides and led directly to his resignation on August 9th, 1974. His departure came after the House Judiciary Committee had voted articles of impeachment. Nixon's lawyers spent subsequent years trying legally to block public access to the Watergate tapes, arguing that many of the conversations were private and privileged. When the Supreme Court rejected their efforts, the lawyers began fighting specific regulations proposed by the National Archives to make the tapes public. So, okay. Meanwhile, the U.S. Court of Appeals ruled in 1992 that Nixon was entitled to just compensation for his materials. Okay. While this issue was still being adjudicated, Nixon died in 1994, and his daughters began to loosen the family's grip on his materials in hopes of a better understanding of their father's presidency. Okay, so a court of appeals in 92 says, well, okay, the government can seize them, but there should be compensation. And I'm not even sure I agree that there should be compensation. I mean, this is just evidence of criminal wrongdoing. I'm not really sure why you should get compensated for that. But, all right. Then Nixon dies 2 years later while they're still working it out. The settlement must be approved by U.S. District Judge John Garrett Penn, who has had the compensation issue under advisement since closing arguments by the Justice Department and Nixon family lawyers ended last December. Again, 1999. The Nixon papers and tapes will remain at a National Archives facility in suburban College Park, Maryland. But the agreement signals that copies may eventually be housed in Orange County, even though the time element is uncertain. Taylor said that Nixon's papers, tapes, and other materials, if ultimately dispersed to the West Coast as well, will help ensure a better appreciation of Nixon's foreign policy achievements, including bringing the Vietnam War to an end. Besides the $6 million for Nixon's library, Nixon's attorneys, led by Herbert J. Miller, will receive $7.4 million, and approximately $3.7 million will go for estate and other federal taxes. After administrative expenses, less than 0.5% will be distributed to Nixon's family. Okay. Nixon's lawyers argued to Judge Penn that an award of $16 million last August to the heirs of amateur filmmaker Abraham Zapruder, right, by a panel of government-approved arbiters showed that the Nixon tapes, by their sheer volume alone, were worth far more. The Zapruder film, only 26 seconds long, captured, of course, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas in November of 1963. However, the Justice Department contended that Nixon's tapes and other records were created, retained, organized, and processed ultimately for one purpose: to deposit them in a Richard Nixon presidential library open to the American people for research. As a result, these materials were dedicated to public use by Mr. Nixon from the earliest days of his administration, to be held in what Mr. Nixon called a public trust, and so have little commercial value, government attorneys argued. That's a good argument. Additionally, they said, the judge should consider that American taxpayers already have spent about $21 million to keep and index all the materials as custodian for 25 years. These are costs which Mr. Nixon would have borne had he retained the materials, the department said in its final legal brief. Interesting. And of course, from Trump's perspective, Nixon got $18 million. Well, of course, his family got a hold of very little of it. What was it, 0.5%? Is that right? So, I guess we should do the math on this. If there was $18 million at stake, then let's see, times 0.005, I guess, $90,000, which, nothing to sneeze at, whatever. And I'm sure anytime the Trumps can grift $90,000, they'll take it. But anyway, it doesn't necessarily stand to reason that they would be compensated the same way. It's not exactly the same kind of materials. Whatever. But there's a long way to go before you get to Trump being entitled to any sort of compensation. And of course, the fact that Nixon's family and library and lawyers got compensation of some kind, A, doesn't mean that Trump would be entitled to the same compensation, and B, doesn't mean that at bottom Trump was right to be able to hold on to these materials or that he had some right to them. No, the government can seize them just the same, but they may offer you compensation. The compensation comes by way of their saying, you don't have the right to retain them, but because we're removing them from your hands, there could be compensation. You can have money, but not documents. Or in the end, they may find you're entitled to neither. So, you run that risk as well. It's interesting, but it doesn't mean that he has the right to retain those documents. He may be entitled to some compensation for them, but that doesn't mean that the documents are allowed to remain with you. It might just be, well, because we assigned some value to them and so did you, the fact that we assert our rights to take them from you doesn't mean that you won't get compensation, but it's still, I mean, I could see where he would be confused about that. Well, if they're going to pay me for them, then obviously I had the right to retain them. And what they're paying for is the refusal to recognize my rights. But that's not exactly the case. It's just, I mean, in the end, the court will rule that if compensation is given, that those documents can be removed and not. And what they're probably not reaching a conclusion on is, well, if the government were to refuse the compensation, then you get the documents back. That might not be the outcome. There's just a fight about whether or not you're also entitled to compensation, but there's no question that the documents belong elsewhere and not with you. So, I don't know. It's a little too complicated for Trump to figure out. And in fact, it's a little too complicated for us to spend any more time on here on the program without doing a little bit more background reading. But interesting nonetheless. And another fun and weird angle on all the amazing things happening in court and on TV these days. Okay, let's see. A couple of other things that it's time to share with you. Let's see. Well, shall we save? Maybe I save this for the last segment, where Joan would no doubt be talking about it, and we'll pretend that Joan is around, and she's with us in spirit, except the spirit has a cold. That's the only problem. Otherwise, and man, I just shouldn't be saying with us in spirit. Like that makes it sound like the illness is a lot worse than it is. It's just a cold, everybody. She's with us because she's with us. She hasn't left us. All right. Well, anyway, made it sound worse than actually was going on. Anyhow. Let's see. Here's an interesting local item, local for people in Tennessee anyway. So if you've made a pilgrimage perhaps to Tennessee to see the site where Larry Hogan's former chief of staff died, it's now a shrine, I understand. I don't know. Then it would be a semi-local story to you. This from the Tennessean. I say local in the sense that it's local to somebody else, not me. Tennessee House Speaker strips Democrats of committee roles after a protest at their Capitol. What's going on here? Interesting story. Vivian Jones reporting this for the Nashville Tennessean. And the story is this. House Speaker Cameron Sexton, a Republican, in case you hadn't guessed, stripped two Democratic lawmakers of their committee assignments. That's now the hot punishment, I guess, and restricted their access to legislative facilities on Monday. That could be difficult and tough to square with legal authority, but I'm not certain that maybe the Tennessee Constitution doesn't guarantee people the right to representation the same way as the federal Constitution. I mean, it's one thing to say have stripped Marjorie Traitor Greene of her committee assignments, but they never said, well, you're not allowed to come into the building to cast votes, for instance. But anyway, why did this happen? It was punishment for their role in a protest in support of gun control at the Capitol on Thursday that brought legislative business to a halt. It was an interesting situation that they found themselves in. Sexton took the action against Representatives Justin Jones of Nashville and Representative Gloria Johnson of Knoxville. Of course, that's where Hogan's chief of staff was recently shot and killed. So maybe she knows the neighborhood. Jones and Johnson, along with Representative Justin Pearson, or perhaps Person, I'm not certain how he pronounces it. It's Pear, P-E-A-R, son. Pearson, I'm guessing Pearson, of Memphis. So Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, all represented here. On Monday, days after they were punished on Monday, days after they interrupted legislative business to lead protesters from the House floor calling for gun control. Pearson does not have any committee assignments as it is, so that's interesting. and not certain why that's the case. Other sanctions, including expulsion from the body, are on the table. Sexton confirmed. Wow. House members could discuss further repercussions Monday, which presumably they did, and I don't have a report on that just yet. On Thursday, the three House Democrats approached the podium between bills without being recognized to speak, breaching the chamber's rules of procedure. Okay, that's fairly serious. With a bullhorn, the three led protesters in the galleries in several chants calling for gun reform. At no point did any demonstrators make their way onto the House floor. In case you were confused by that sentence, I was. The one where it says they led protesters from the House floor. It's not that they were, and that actually makes it sound like protesters got onto the House floor and they led them from the House floor, though it sounds like they escorted them off. So why are they in trouble? It's that they led the cheers from the House floor, even though no protesters were on the House floor. They were in the gallery, and here's a picture of them. Yeah, and they're standing there with a bullhorn, which, probably a pretty good indication that something unusual and out of order is happening here. But, not the worst violation ever, but it is a breach of decorum, certainly, and you're not supposed to play to the galleries, at least in the, in the federal Congress. It's, you're supposed to address your remarks to the chair, and you're not supposed to acknowledge what goes on in the galleries, and you're certainly not supposed to bring a bullhorn and lead a chant. But, you get a reprimand. You don't really need to be stripped of your committee assignments. But Republicans everywhere are thinking tit for tat here, and I saw in the federal government where they took away the committee assignments of Marjorie Traitor Greene and Paul Gosar. So we're going to do that to Democrats here. I guess, it's a real imbalance. The punishment just does not fit the crime. And I assume that they won't go forward with the expulsion idea, but because they, may have a Republican supermajority there, maybe they'll try it. I don't know, just because it certainly doesn't fit the crime, but neither does the punishment they've given them. So, okay. Anyway, with that bullhorn, the three led protesters in the galleries and several chants calling for gun reform, and nobody got onto the House floor. But Sexton immediately recessed the chamber, halting legislative business for nearly an hour before it resumed, and ordered security to clear the House galleries. What they did was try to hold up the people's business on the House floor instead of doing it in the way that they should have done it, which I don't know what they think is, which they have the means to do, Sexton said Monday. I suppose they mean asking to be recognized on the House floor and speaking for a couple of minutes in favor of gun reform. They were doing a protest action, certainly, and I know they understood that. But it is interesting. It's interesting to note that here there was, of course, calls for gun reform, which are pretty much appropriate everywhere, but particularly so in Tennessee these days, given that they were the site of the most recent splashy and widely noticed mass shooting, the school shootings, of course. And so, it made some sense, and they should expect to have that protest. But it's just interesting that in a call for gun reform, there was, some chanting from the galleries, and they are stripping people of their committee assignments and talking about expelling them. Meanwhile, January 6th, 2021, actual armed insurrection, beating cops, smashing their way through windows. Yes, protesters do get onto the House and Senate floor and do interrupt legislative business. And not a single member of the House was stripped of their committee assignments as a result of that activity, and no one's been expelled, and there aren't any members of Congress at the moment facing real consequences for what happened there in an effort to overturn the election and possibly overthrow the government of the United States. But these guys had a bullhorn. And 2 out of the 3 of them were black. So, there you have it. So what they did was try to hold up the people's business on the House floor instead of doing it the way they should have done it, which they had the means to do. Sexton said they actually thought that they would be arrested. And so they decided that them being a victim was more important than focusing on the 6 victims from Monday. And that's appalling. Okay, sure. That's a little bit That's a rhetorical flourish that probably was not necessary and doesn't really hold water. But it's certainly likely that they thought they might be arrested in this protest action, although they probably have something in the Tennessee Constitution approximating a right to speech and debate clause protection from arrest, since they were doing it from the House floor. Anyway, Johnson told reporters on Monday that the three lawmakers were, quote, tired of our voice not being heard. We decided, between bills, we are going to walk up and we're going to acknowledge the people surrounding the building in the rotunda, and we're going to speak to their issue and tell them that we are with them, she said. Jones told reporters he wasn't pleading for mercy. They're threatening to expel us, Jones told reporters. They're trying to make an example of us. This is a political lynching, but we will not back down. Following the demonstration, Johnson, Pearson, and Jones's access to the Cordell Hull Legislative Office building, and members' parking garage were restricted. Johnson told reporters Monday that her building access badge had been deactivated and she was unable to access the building to retrieve her mobility scooter over the weekend. That's not real cool. No one told me that my garage pass was cut off. No one told me that my badge to the building was cut off, Johnson said. My scooter was inside the building. I needed it at home. I don't always need it at home on the weekend, but I needed it this past weekend because it was a big downtown event. I was not able to have it. I was not able to do the things that I needed to do. Doug Kuffner, a spokesperson for Sexton, confirmed access was restricted for the three members on Monday. Representative Johnson was on limited access after her antics on Thursday, Kuffner told the Tennessean. A trooper is always on site, and the number is posted on the door outside the garage. They could have helped her. Representative Johnson could also have called her leadership team for her caucus, the clerk, the speaker's office, or HR if she has trouble accessing the building. Well, of course she was going to have trouble accessing the building. You cut her badge off. Anyway, all three continue to have their offices and legislative staff and will continue to be called on the House floor for the time being, Sexton said Monday. So I guess they avoid constitutional issues that way. That's smart. The last time the House expelled a sitting lawmaker was in 2016 when the chamber voted 70-2 to remove then Representative Jeremy Durham, a Republican, from the House for alleged sexual misconduct. I never would have guessed when it comes to a Republican that would be the case. At the time, it was the first expulsion since 1980 and only the second since the Civil War. Last year, for the first time in its history, the Tennessee Senate voted to expel a senator, stripping Senator Katrina Robinson, a Democrat, of her elected position following her federal conviction on federal wire fraud charges. That one, of course, makes considerably more sense. You get convicted, they're going to do something like that. All right, so eyes on Tennessee. They're making a borderline case of it here. I don't think that they're going to go ahead with expulsion. It would be incongruous to the supposed crime here, but I don't know. Republicans do wacky things from time to time when they get a hold of power. So we'll keep an eye on that one and see if, one, if anything happens, and two, whether news of it, in fact, percolates up to our notice. I should put an AI chatbot on this and ask them to watch the situation. All right, let's see. A couple other things. Almost time for our last break before our segment where we'll pretend to be talking to Joan and cover her issues and what she's been writing about as well. And these, of course, one of them, obviously, the upcoming debt ceiling crisis. I've definitely got something from the New York Times on that one. Let's see if we can squeeze this in, just because this has been waiting for a little while and something that won't fit, but raise an issue that we should have been watching all along. The Guardian, reporting this from the UN. Julian Borger in New York, covering the UN, has this piece under the title of Absurdity to a New Level. That's in quotes. What is this absurdity? Well, it's happening as Russia takes charge of the UN Security Council. That is kind of crazy. Of course, they occupy, for reasons, if you really think about it, reasons unknown, the seat of the former Soviet Union as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and I guess they'll now be chairing it while conducting a war attempting to occupy and annex a free and independent neighboring country. That's the sort of thing you'd be on the UN Security Council to try to prevent from happening. But here we are. What can I tell you? Monthly rotation of the presidency of the 15-member council has been unaffected, apparently, by the Ukraine war, says the subheader here. We'll just read a little bit before we jump out for our break. In Ukraine, Moscow is pursuing an unprovoked war of aggression. In The Hague, Vladimir Putin is facing an arrest warrant for war crimes. But at the UN, Russia is about to take charge of a powerful international body, the Security Council. I didn't realize they rotated monthly. That seems, excessive. From Saturday, it will be Russia's turn to take up the monthly presidency of the 15-member council, in line with a rotation that has been unaffected by the Ukraine war. The last time Russia held the gavel was February of last year, when Putin declared his special military operation in the middle of a council session on Ukraine. Yikes. That is a little weird, isn't it? Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Well, as I finished up the piece from the Tennessean, I noticed that on Mastodon, Mighty OCD had sent me a link to a Tennessean story, but it's actually the one we were reading. And I don't know if that was your intention to send us that one, or is there something new from the Tennessean? Maybe I should just go over there and then click on their main headline link. Here we go. All right. It was a good idea, and I think that's probably what you meant for us to do, and maybe you accidentally sent us the wrong link, but you probably meant the link to the latest top headline at the Tennessean right now, in case you were wondering whether they were crazy/stupid enough to do something like this. Tennessee GOP, that's the GOP, begins expulsion process for 3 Democrats. House session devolves into chaos. As I'm sure it will continue to, because this really just doesn't fit as punishment for what actually happened here. A reprimand probably would have been the resulting punishment at the federal Capitol, and they really just should have availed themselves of that too. I mean, they should be reprimanded, and they probably anticipated being reprimanded, although even if they anticipated being arrested, they could have done that too. I don't know, would have posed constitutional issues, but now, And this should pose constitutional issues, but then again, it's up to the legislature itself to decide whether or not expulsion is the proper punishment. And there's really not too much you can do about it. But because they're essentially unreviewable in that, you should stop, pause, think about whether or not you want to expel elected members for something like this. I mean, it interrupted legislative business for a couple of minutes and had no legislative impact whatsoever. It didn't change the law or the nature of the law or the approach to the lawmaking. And it just wasn't that serious a violation. You don't want to encourage it from happening again, so you have the reprimand, but you should have left it at that. Monday night's House session turned chaotic amid action over resolutions to expel 3 Democratic members. And again, here, it's probably, the rough equivalent of Tennessee's version of the House Freedom Caucus, figuring this is the splashiest and most disruptive thing that we can do, and so we'll do it. Even though they were probably being advised, it's inappropriate to the action, and it's just going to make you look petty and vindictive, and you ought not to do it. But probably, there were some radicals there who just thought, well, we just want the story and the fight, even if we won't win on the expulsion vote. It's entirely possible that even with a supermajority, enough Republican members will just say, nah, it's just not appropriate punishment, and we're not going to support it. And then they'll draw primary challengers, and you're a rhino, et cetera, et cetera. So things will only get worse. So from the Freedom Caucus type position, it actually makes sense. They'll lose the vote, but they might actually replace some so-called moderate Republican members with bomb throwers. So I guess it's win-win for them. All right. Melissa Brown and Vivian Jones reporting for the Nashville Tennessean here. Again, thanks to Mighty OCD for at least alerting us that there was more. I figured there would be more news about this. So thanks for pointing to the Tennessean. Yells rang out throughout the state capitol as Tennessee House Republicans on Monday introduced resolutions to expel 3 Democrats for disorderly behavior. That's just not something you end up getting thrown out for. And of course, it sparked more disorderly behavior, didn't it? This after the trio led protest chants for gun reform on the floor of the chamber last week in the wake of the deadly Covenant school shooting. On Thursday, the 3 House Democrats approached the podium between bills without being recognized to speak, a breach of chamber rules, with a bullhorn. Representatives Gloria Johnson of Knoxville, Justin Jones of Nashville, and Justin Pearson of Memphis led protesters in the gallery in several chants calling for gun reform. House leadership later likened the trio's behavior to, quote, an insurrection, a characterization House Democrats decried last week. I mean, 0 cops beaten, 0 shaman occupying the podium in giant water buffalo lodge hats, no spears carried, very little, i.e. 0 tear gas deployed, etc. It's kind of a ridiculous comparison. And I'd love to know the total amount of time elapsed in the disruption, too. That would be an interesting comparison. Anyway, House Republicans formally introduced 3 expulsion resolutions at the end of Monday's evening sessions. The resolutions claim the 3, quote, did knowingly and intentionally bring disorder and dishonor to the House of Representatives through their individual and collective actions. Final votes to expel the 3 members will occur Thursday. Johnson, Jones, and Pearson will have an opportunity to defend their actions during that session. The House chamber fell into chaos as Republican Representative Andrew Farmer, a Republican again of Sevierville, maybe. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I should stop with the town names at this point. He introduced the first resolution, which called for Pearson's expulsion. Protesters screamed from the galleries above. Pearson raised his fist in protest, and House Democrats raised their hands to object. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Of course, he raised his fist, and he's a black guy. So that's terrible, and we have to expel him. It's not like when white guys like Josh Hawley raise their fists, as you know. Anyway, amid the chaos, House Speaker Cameron Sexton, Republican of course, called for the vote, and the resolution passed with overwhelming support from the Republican supermajority. Oh, really? Okay. So what are they talking about Thursday? Amid the chaos, and maybe this is, let's see. I don't know whether this is like a call for first reading or something. Sometimes the states have odd procedural rules. But I mean, this is just, what's the headline again? Begin expulsion process. So, I mean, it sounds like the final vote would be Thursday. But anyway, I guess House Republicans showing that they're willing to go along with something as crazy and extreme as expulsion for a few minutes interruption on the House floor. Imagine what they would do with an armed insurrection that smashed windows in and caused the evacuation of the entire body. Goodness me. Though that, I'm sure, they regard as regular tourism, as you know, because they're Republicans. I mean, this is really a fairly strong indication of, the weird gimmitarian fascist behavior among Republicans. And this is, mainstream Republicans, elected officials in Tennessee, that they're acting like this and yet would be excusing the events of January 6th, no doubt. So let's see. Amid the chaos, the House Speaker called for a vote. The resolution passed with overwhelming support from the Republican supermajority. All three resolutions passed in party line votes, 72 to 23. Democrats will have little power to block expulsions on Thursday. So I guess, I don't know what the process is. I guess if they approve these resolutions, then I guess they schedule something for Thursday where they, carry out the punishment called for in the resolution, and there's no additional voting to be done. It's a weird, this is a Capital Tennessee protest explainer. Here's what did and did not happen. Maybe we should read that since it's getting more serious now. Sexton did not recess the chamber as protesters in the gallery began chants of fascists, and maybe they should, and wagged their fingers and fists at members. Instead, the speaker called for state troopers to clear the House galleries. A knot of lawmakers converged on the floor in confrontation. After House business resumed, Jones accused Representative Justin Lafferty, a Republican of Knoxville, that I know how to pronounce, of misconduct. Both lawmakers were taking video of the House galleries, and a scuffle ensued with Lafferty snatching Jones's phone away at some point. It's unclear exactly what took place between the two, although Jones said he was pushed. This is getting rather serious now. Physical confrontations on the House floor. And embedded here is Justin Jones' tweet. He should move from Twitter over to Mastodon, but, he has reasons to stay there, I'm sure. And here it is. Yeah. So he's videotaping the galleries and says, tonight, as Tennessee House Republicans push forward to a scheduled vote on our expulsion, Speaker Sexton orders the galleries cleared as the crowd chants fascists. Media forced out as well. Then Representative Lafferty pushes me and grabs my phone. This is a sad day for Tennessee. And honestly, they won't do it, but just to give you an idea of exactly what's going on here, there was just an assault on the floor of the House. And I guarantee you there will be no expulsion vote for Representative Lafferty, Justin Lafferty, even though there's probably now video evidence of that assault. There won't be any expulsion for him because he's a Republican, and it's okay if you're a Republican. Well, we'll read on. Democratic lawmakers push back. The trio were present and voted on bills on Monday night. Together they represent more than 210,000 constituents. We're going to push back and we're going to fight this because it's unprecedented and utterly ridiculous, Johnson said. Johnson said she would consider a lawsuit if expelled. And it's on iffy grounds if, the prerogative belongs to the legislature. But just the one of the illustrated dangers of allowing fascists to hold supermajorities in these legislative bodies. They might just say, let's expel all Democrats. We'll just build on what Marjorie Traitor Greene told Leslie Stahl. There was no pushback on it on television, national television the other night, to say, all right, they're all pedophiles. Well, why don't we just expel them all? They can't expel them all in the U.S. House of Representatives because they don't have that supermajority. But in Tennessee, they certainly do. So why not just claim they're all pedophiles and throw them out and win every vote 100-0? Well, it won't be 100, but they'll win 100% of the vote anyway. Just expel them. After all, between that and the bill in Florida to outlaw the Democratic Party, why not? And eventually one of them will go too far and do it, right? This was a very stupid overreaction that, 20 minutes ago I told you they'd never get around to. It was just probably some freak in the Tennessee legislature, but now we realize the Tennessee legislature is entirely freaks. So I guess there you have it. Okay, let's see. Yeah, stop calling and giving me voicemail in the middle of my show, everybody. Okay, let's see. So Johnson says she'd consider a lawsuit, and why not? I mean, at that point, you might as well consider the lawsuit. I don't know what the grounds would be, but arguing, of course, that their protest is constitutionally protected. Yes, the problem would be they'd be protected from arrest and prosecution probably by the executive branch, but the legislative branch probably retains the prerogative to expel them, although you never know. Because, we've seen cases like that reversed on the federal level as well, where the legislature asserted that they had the right to expel Adam Clayton Powell, but then some real dispute over whether or not the grounds were proper. So I guess there's room for a lawsuit. You might as well file it anyway. Let's see. She also pointed to a list of recent scandals involving lawmakers that didn't lead to expulsion, including the former House Speaker Glenn Casada, a Republican, who is under federal indictment, and former Representative David Byrd, who was accused of sexually assaulting teenagers when he was a basketball coach decades earlier. I suppose if convictions come through, they might then go ahead and do something about that. But this is a good point. Might as well bring it up. We had a child molester on the floor for years. They helped him get reelected and did nothing to expel him, Johnson said. We've had members pee in each other's chairs. That does sound rather extreme. We've had members illegally prescribe drugs to their cousin mistress, and nothing happened. Wow. But talk on the floor without permission, you'll get expelled. Okay. She's got a point there. The House Democratic Caucus released a statement after Monday's vote saying the caucus stands firmly united with its members. The Democratic Caucus has unanimously, formally voted to oppose the baseless resolutions for expulsion and will zealously oppose them should they come up for a vote on the House floor, the statement said. I'm confused about the fact that there was apparently a vote, but I guess it's a multi-stage process. Tennessee Black Caucus of State Legislators also issued a statement Monday night objecting to the resolutions. This political retribution is unconstitutional and, in this moment, morally bankrupt, the group said. The people who elected us are calling for meaningful action to end gun violence, and the people have a right to be heard through their duly elected representatives. The group said Sexton instead should be leading a real bipartisan discussion to generate reforms that could stop the next school shooting. All right, next section here, floor protest by Democrats. The trio's floor protest last Thursday came just days after the deadly Covenant shooting that left 3 children and 3 school staff members dead. House lawmakers on Thursday had to walk through a gauntlet of protesters, many of whom were teenagers, who had marched on the Tennessee Capitol demanding gun reform. On the floor, Jones verbally sparred several times with Sexton. After the trio approached the well, the area in front of the chamber where lawmakers speak, Sexton immediately recessed the chamber, halting legislative business for nearly an hour, my God, and ordering security to clear the House galleries of spectators. Before the galleries were cleared, the Democratic trio led the crowd in chants of gun reform now. The trio later walked off the House floor after a heated confrontation with their own Democratic leadership. Though leadership has since supported their actions, the House resumed its regular calendar, with the Democrats remaining on the floor. Following the demonstration, Johnson, Pearson, and Jones's access to the Cordell Hull Legislative Office Building and members' parking garage was restricted. Johnson told reporters, of course, that her building access badge had been deactivated and she was unable to access the building to retrieve her mobility scooter. We heard about that before. No one told me my garage pass was cut off. We heard that story, and even that was probably a little bit too much. Expulsion is crazy. Doug Kuffner, spokesman for Sexton, confirmed access was restricted. His claim that, she could have got her scooter if she had tried hard enough. But, it's a mobility scooter. How hard? Anyway, can you do anything if you don't have that? Anyway, all 3 continue to have access to their offices and legislative staff for the moment. Meanwhile, Sexton stripped Johnson and Jones of their committee assignments. What they did, we heard that whole statement from the last story. Let's see. Waiting outside the chamber on Monday night, Jones had a said a non-bipartisan expulsion vote would be unprecedented. Okay, the last time they talk about the previous expulsions, we heard about those. Let's see. Robert Fisher, I don't know if we hear about that guy, was kicked out of the House in 1980 after being convicted of soliciting a $1,000 bribe in exchange to kill a bill. 6 lawmakers were ousted during an 1866 special session after they tried to prevent Tennessee from ratifying an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to provide citizenship to former slaves. Last year, for the first time in history, Senate expelled somebody. We heard about that story too. Okay. Any further notes? I don't think so. All right. I'll just check in with, Mighty OCD, just letting us know that they are effing nuts, and they really are. This is rather remarkable, quite honestly. And yes, that's the headline, or the latest was the one he says that he meant to send. So, well, we figured it out. All right, we better keep an eye on that. So by Thursday, we'll know whether they expel these guys. And that's really just honestly such an overreach and overreaction. I wouldn't be surprised to see some Tennessee state courts. We'll see whether, I could also see them saying it's dumb and unfounded, but the power to expel members is up to the legislature and unreviewable by us. And, it's right on the principle, but it's also handing the fascist wackos just a little bit too much power in all of this. And you'll then likely just see any place where there are Republican supermajorities just making excuses to expel Democrats for nothing if you allow this to go forward. So, it's a tricky subject, to say the least. You uphold the principle of separation of powers, but that just gives fascists who hold the power the opportunity to destroy everything that the separation of powers was meant to preserve. So, that's kind of weird and tricky. All right, let's see. There was definitely some other things that I wanted to spend some time on. And in fact, I didn't get through the story from out of the UN, but there's a lot of detail to it, but, wow. And it does lead us to something else that we probably ought to be discussing, but then it precludes our discussion of the Joan-like subjects, but I don't know. Let's see if we can squeeze them all in, but I'll go back to the Guardian article about the Security Council, because it raises a lot of issues. You've heard the basic issue. You really shouldn't have Russia taking the gavel of the Security Council at all, ever. And really, they shouldn't even occupy that seat. We've questioned the propriety of having them occupy the Soviet Union seat before on the show. But, no one listens to this show about UN issues. We have no expertise in it whatsoever. But still, it is a weird situation, isn't it? So where were we? The last time Russia held the gavel, right? In February of last year, when Putin declared his special military operation in the middle of a council session on Ukraine. 14 months on, tens of thousands of people have been killed, many of them civilians. Cities have been ruined, and Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court for the mass abduction of Ukrainian children. Not really the people you want to hand the gavel to. In such circumstances, putting Russia in the driving seat of a world body tasked with maintaining international peace and security seems like a cruel April Fool's joke to many, not least the Ukrainian mission to the UN. As of April 1st, they're taking the level of absurdity to a new level, said Sergei Kislistya, I'm guessing is the pronunciation of his last name, the Ukrainian permanent representative. The Security Council, as it is designed, is immobilized and incapable to address the issues of their primary responsibility. That is, prevention of conflicts and then dealing with conflicts. And I suppose they might, maybe the monthly rotation of the presidency anticipates exactly such absurdity and saying, well, we don't know what to anticipate in the future. It could be any weird thing happening in the future, but at least it only lasts a month. Maybe, I wonder if that's their justification. But it is an odd rotation, don't you think? A month? What do you do with that? And I guess the idea is nobody will be able to do anything in particular, so it neutralizes the threat. If they pass the gavel on, I mean, what happens? I mean, at this point, it's a rogue state. Suppose they just say, no, we don't recognize the power of the charter to pass the gavel. We're going to retain it. Do you have a vote on expelling Russia? And as a permanent member of the Security Council, do they just veto the resolution? I don't know. I don't know enough about how they work to be able to deal with that one. Anyway, the ambassador said Ukraine would stay away from the Security Council in April, except in case of an issue of critical national security interest. Ukraine is not a current council member, though it is often called to speak to issues related to the war. The U.S., Britain, France, and their supporters on the council are likely to show their disapproval by downgrading the level of their representation at Russian-hosted events over the course of the month, but no member state is known to be planning any form of boycott or other protest. The U.S. on Thursday urged Russia to, quote, conduct itself professionally when it assumes the role, but said there was no means to block Moscow from the post. The Kremlin said on Friday that Russia plans to exercise all its rights on the council. Diplomats at the UN headquarters in New York point out that most of the council's agenda in April, like any month, is taken up by routine briefings and reports on UN peacekeeping missions around the world. It's important to protect the rest of the world's council work on other files, one European diplomat said. We don't want to disrupt the work that the council is doing elsewhere because that would allow Russia's invasion to have an even wider impact on issues of peace and security around the world. That is a good point. The council presidency does give the monthly incumbent the power to organize its own sessions, and Russia is planning 3. On April 10th, it will hold a briefing on the, quote, risks stemming from the violations of the agreements regulating the export of weapons and military equipment, at which it is expected to single out the U.S. for its arms supplies to Ukraine and to other allies over recent years. Later in the month, it will chair 2 open debates on effective multilateralism and the situation in the Middle East, over which its foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, is expected to preside. The last occasion when a permanent member of the council carried out an unprovoked invasion, my collar is a little tight here. It was, of course, during the United States' invasion of Iraq. Ugh. Okay, so, we'll point out very rightly that this makes 0 sense, and the Russians will say, well, as it happens, it didn't make a great deal of sense that you should be invading Iraq while you are holding the gavel, the presidency of the UN Security Council. And I suppose at that point, we would probably respond, well, there was an international coalition. Yeah, well, it wasn't unanimous or anything like that. They have a point there. And that's not great. And one of the things you have to realize when you push to use the UN to cover for your invasion is that, well, somebody else is going to do that at some point now, too, now that the precedent is established. Not that they wouldn't have done it anyway, even without the precedent, but, it's going to weaken your case in the future when and if Russia or somebody else, China or, I don't know, France for that matter, gets a hold of the gavel too and, has reason to find themselves involved in aggressive military action somewhere in the world. Okay, well, the U.S. was not subjected to the humiliation of repeated overwhelming defeats in the UN General Assembly of the kind that Russia has endured over the past year, with about 140 of the 193 member states voting against Moscow's position, leaving Belarus, Eritrea, Syria, and North Korea as Russia's only reliable friends. Okay, that's a difference. Russia's deputy permanent representative, Dmitry Polyansky, I hope I got that Do I care if I got that right? Denied that his mission was becoming a pariah at the UN. Absolutely not. We feel that the West is embattled in the UN right now because more countries understand our position, Polyansky said, claiming that the Western allies had to water down resolutions and arm twist to get 140 votes. So I think that it's rather the West is isolated, but not us in the General Assembly. Well, that's an interesting perspective, but there's some truth to that too. As far as Putin's ICC arrest warrant, Polyansky dismissed it as totally irrelevant to any of our activities. The last time the Russian leader traveled to the UN headquarters was 2015, and I guess he can't now if he's under ICC warrant. In the Security Council, the balance of diplomatic forces is less clear-cut than in the General Assembly. The division of the 5 permanent members, the US, UK, France, Russia, and China, has hardened considerably, with China regularly echoing Russian talking points in the Council. The 10 non-permanent members are elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly. Among the current batch, Mozambique, the United Arab Emirates, and Gabon have generally stayed neutral over the Ukraine invasion. Brazil is moving into the neutral column. Polyansky said the BRICS group of BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, there's the S, was drawing closer together and claimed there were 20 other countries interested in affiliation. That becomes very interesting in light of the news about the rapprochement, I suppose, is that the French pronunciation, between Saudi Arabia and Iran as respectively the nominal world leaders in the Sunni and Shia Muslim world, and their constant battles over, well, all sorts of things, dominance in the Middle East, oil and gas issues, etc., etc. And as they draw closer together and find ways to work together, and think about aligning themselves possibly with the emerging BRICS alliance and under Chinese and Russian leadership, the world order may in fact change at some point. I have more on that issue, also provided to me by my brother Mark, waiting in the wings.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, well, a totally different direction for the last segment. Certainly we would have been moving in a different direction if Joan were here today, but we'll take care of those issues later in the week. Definitely want to update you on what's happening with the brinkmanship being played out by the Republicans, who have no agreement in which direction they're going. Well, see you tomorrow.